Hello and welcome to the forum. I'm John Matisonn. Later in the show, we'll talk about a plan to end the plunder of South Africa's fishing resources. But first, my guest is Professor Tshilidzi Marwala. He's the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. But he came to public attention in South Africa when President Ramaphosa appointed him to head the President's Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Professor Marwala has had an extraordinary academic career. His first degree was at Case Western University, where he did electrical engineering and earned his degree magna cum laude, which means with high distinction. He did a master's degree in Pretoria University and then a doctorate at Cambridge. Last Sunday, Professor Marwala wrote an opinion piece in the Sunday Times on the broader South African reforms. And we'll come to that later, but in the meantime, I want to welcome you, Professor. Welcome to the forum.
Thank you very much, John, and good day to your listeners.
And I want to congratulate you on your latest book, Closing the Gap, The Fourth Industrial Revolution in Africa.
Well, thank you very much. You know, I have written 18 books. 18 books. I always worried that many of my books were never in bookstores in South Africa.
They were too specialist.
It's a special book for me because this is a book that is actually accessible to our citizens.
Yes, exactly. That was exactly my view when I read it. It is the ideal book to understand the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which we need to do. So before we get into the substance, I want to give you my layman's version of the first, second, and third, and fourth industrial revolutions, which you'll see is even simpler than yours maybe. And that is the first industrial revolution, so everybody understands, was the steam engine, use of steam for steam engines and early machinery. The second industrial revolution was the use of oil and electricity and perhaps the internal combustion engine. The third industrial revolution was the information economy, the integration of telecommunications and IT. And the fourth industrial revolution, which we're going to talk about, is about intelligent machinery and infrastructure. Is that basically correct?
Absolutely. I mean, you put it so well that I should invite you to come to our classrooms to teach our students.
I'm available. Professor, okay, well, I want to start, now that we've had a mutual admiration society, I want to start with a negative question. Many politicians talk about the 4IR, the Fourth Industrial Revolution in South Africa, as if it's going to solve our problems of the job crisis. And I think you would agree that's not true. The jobs crisis is urgent and needs to be solved, but 4IR in itself is not the solution.
Yeah, well, I would put it slightly different, that the 4IR is going to worsen the job market. Paying attention to it will allow us to contain the job bloodbath that is going to happen as a result of automation and movement of production to countries that have invested into the fourth industrial revolution economy. So if we do nothing about it, the jobs that we have will simply disappear. We have to do something about it. What you are saying is that in addition to the jobs that we need to protect, there's going to be jobs that we simply cannot be able to protect because they are simply going to disappear. And what are we going to do about it?
Exactly. So what does 4IR fix?
What 4IR fix is the issue of competitiveness. One of the things that we don't talk about in South Africa, and we don't even talk about it when we are talking about economic recovery plan, is the issue of competitiveness. When I was growing up in Limpopo province, many years ago, in the 80s, the shoes that I used to wear were made in South Africa. Much of the clothes that I used to wear were made in South Africa. Today, none of those things are made in South Africa simply because we are no longer competitive enough. And because we are no longer competitive enough, it is simply cheaper for, I don't know, Edgar's and any other store to import these clothes and other goods from China and other Asian countries for consumption in South Africa. Now, the fourth industrial revolution is going to give us the opportunity to insert into our productive capacity the ability to compete. And if we can compete, then we can be able to contain some of the drastic consequences of the digitization and the automation of production.
And so I don't want to go into details on this now, but you're saying that 4IR is the future, we have to embrace it, but we also have to recognize that we need a whole other set of solutions to our jobs problem.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it is quite clear that you are not going to solve a job problem unless you make South Africa competitive.
Yes.
China, initially, it was competing on the price, the cost of labor, and the technology that they're advancing. But the technology was not the differentiator because you could find it in North America and you could find it in Europe. So they use the cost of labor. India is basically using the same model. What is our competitive edge here in South Africa? And I think that the fourth industrial revolution is a basic that we must have. The rest is really to find that competitive edge so that we can improve our.
So what do we need? Where are the areas where 4IR will be productive in South Africa that we need to embrace?
No, I think if we can just go back to the production of clothes, shoes, the textile industry. Everybody's saying the textile industry has disappeared from South Africa, and that is true. For us to be able to attract it back with a view of exporting the products to the rest of the African continent, we have to invest into automation. We have to invest into new materials that are used for making these products. And this is really what 4IR is all about. And then if you look at manufacturing now is at about 13%. At one stage, it was contributing more than 30% to our economy. And we have had certainly the premier of Gauteng talking about reversing the deindustrialization. Well, I have a word for the premier. There's not going to be a reversal of deindustrialization without investing into the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. If you are not automating, you simply cannot be competitive enough. That's another industry that we need to infuse 4IR in order to become competitive. The services industry, there's no reason whatsoever why the United States must prefer to do call centers in India rather than in South Africa. And obviously the call center is not just about people sitting in a room and answering queries. Of course, we know that if you are going to be servicing countries such as United States and much of Europe, you will have to know how to speak English. But there is a technology that you need to do, technology that monitors the behavior of these people who are working in these call centers, the technologies that are monitoring drop calls. These are the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, and we can compete as South Africa in this.
Now, before we go to our first break, I want to ask you another negative question. We have missed our opportunities to a great degree, not totally, but to a great degree, in the third industrial revolution. In other words, for the information economy of the last 20, 30 years, we should have speeded up a spectrum allocation, the digital migration of television, so that that would free up so much frequency for cheaper, faster Wi-Fi and broadband. How can we go for 4IR when I mean, surely we should be very critical of our performance in keeping up with digital migration and the allowing the best quality Wi-Fi and broadband.
Absolutely, and this is where the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution becomes important, because we have a key recommendation about infrastructure, 4IR infrastructure. And infrastructure, in our own definition, actually means include spectrum allocation. There's no reason why we should have spent 15 years without allocating spectrum. It has to be done sooner rather than later, because if we don't do it, the 5G is just going to be a pipe dream. So that is very, very important. I agree with you. We have to release the spectrum, and spectrum is a key infrastructure into the 4IR. And the issue of moving our broadcasting from analog to digital, very, very important, because this analog technology actually takes a huge amount of spectrum. And if we can be able to release such a spectrum, then we can be able to invest into better performing technologies such as 5G. Another issue that we need to do, and ICASA probably is supposed to do, and I've already told you that I believe that ICASA needs to be revamped to be a digital regulator, is the issue of basically disabling the infrastructure of 2G. Because right now, if you open your Nokia phone, it can be able to catch the signal. Now, you might ask, what is the problem? The problem is that you have these telecommunication companies that are supposed to keep the infrastructure that is able to allow people to communicate using 2G, 3G, and 4G, and soon 5G. And I think that makes the sector expensive. Let us move with the times. Let us be adaptive. When technology is actually runs out, we must move on and adopt new technologies and not overburden our telecom sector with maintaining the infrastructure of technology of yesterday.
Professor Marwala, we need to take a break. We'll be right back. And we're back talking to Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, author of Closing the Gap. Professor, before we leave this subject, why have we failed? I mean, I know that we had a digital commission in, I think it was the year 2000, in 2000, 20 years ago. And the International Telecommunications Union gave South Africa a deadline of 2015 to finish this migration, which would be very good for jobs. And as you say, these are good jobs, call centers, things like that, and programming, all kinds of different things. And yet we're 5 years behind even that deadline, and we're behind many African countries. What are we failing to, what is the cause of our failure?
I think it's a confluence of a number of issues. I think we can't rule out corruption. Because if you remember when we were talking about digital migration, there were issues of set-top boxes. The set-top boxes were going to be very lucrative to certain industries. Decisions just never got made, you know. So there is an element of vested self-interest, which was damaging to us as consumers and us as South Africans. Our economy was greatly damaged. Then the second issue is actually the technology know-how. The lack of technical skills, especially in our political class, has actually been very damaging to South Africa.
Because we have the skills in South Africa, it's with the politicians that we don't have it.
Exactly. That is why I actually do mention the political class.
Yes.
And this calls to action. What are we doing in order to improve the technological literacy of our politicians? Because it is quite clear that if our politicians are technologically illiterate, if our politicians don't even understand what a spectrum is and why is it important, how in the world do we expect them to be able to make the correct decisions and see the agency of the decisions that are required of them to make? I think that is very, very important. We should not take it for granted. It means that when we move forward, we have to infuse our leadership with the technological know-how in terms of infusing people who understand these technologies, but also to educate our lawmakers to be able to understand these technologies. And I think those are the core reasons why this has never happened. And ultimately, this leads to political will, that it was just never a priority to digitally. We talked about it. I remember in Malelane with the former president of South Africa, not even former President Jacob Zuma. It was during the time of former President Thabo Mbeki, where we were talking about digital migration in front of an international panel or an international advisory panel with such big technological thinkers such as the CEO of HP then, Caliph from California. And these things just never got implemented. And the sooner we get down and implement them and allocate spectrum, the better.
I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but since you've raised it, I must follow up with this point. You know, the set-top box issue is still alive. I mean, the government is still operating as if we're going to create these set-top boxes, and it's got be a very confusing picture. But in fact, we have had for 5 years now digital transmitters ready to transmit using set-top boxes. And meanwhile, the technology is completely leapfrogged. You don't need any of those transmitters. So we have spent billions of rands on these digital transmitters. But in fact, you could do it all on satellite more effectively and cheaper now. But okay, you have a lot of power, Professor. Are you going to be able to do anything about this, or are we going to stumble on back to another digital migration with set-top boxes and the current digital transmitters?
No, you just hit the nail on his head. Let's do it. The technology has moved on.
Yes.
The set-top boxes are not as relevant as they was. In fact, I would go as far as saying that they are no longer relevant. Yes. We can do that without them. But obviously, these are difficult technological matters that needs to be put to the decision.
Actually, they're not difficult technological matters. They're difficult politically, because obviously you put some noses out of joint.
Of course.
I want to move on from there to look at some of the other implications and some of the recommendations of your commission. I know that education is a key factor, and I believe that at the University of Johannesburg, you have already started to make some of the adaptations you think are necessary. For instance, you've developed a degree in politics, economics, and technology, a sort of an advance on the old idea of politics, philosophy, and economics. Tell us why you're doing that and what that means for South Africa.
The idea came to me when I was invited to speak on the topic of the future of AI at the Oxford Union. I think it was last year.
Artificial intelligence.
And when I arrived at the Oxford Union, it's all televised, you know. They took me to a room where you have to sign, you know, that you have come to speak at the Oxford Union, and they show you all these pictures. And I see all these British politicians. Yes. All of them have studied a degree called PPE, Politics, Philosophy, and Economics.
Exactly.
And including David Cameron, the architect of he almost became an architect of the disintegration of the United Kingdom. Right. When he decided to do a referendum about Scotland moving out. Yes. And then he obviously was the architect of Brexit, which to me, I still think it does not make any sense. Right. So I said, but what is wrong with this PPE? What is this PPE doing to produce leaders who are not able to see things as broadly as they're supposed to see things? Then it dawned to me that the biggest driver of society today is actually technology. You know, this social networking, Facebook is much more powerful than politicians. Twitter is much more powerful than politicians. And then I said, what do we do about it? That is when I came up with the idea of politics, economics, and technology. You have to understand the politics, you have to understand the economy, but most importantly, you have to understand the technology and the interfaces and the connectivity between these three. I think this is what we need in the fourth industrial revolution era, so that we can be able to have the people who will be able to thrive in this era.
Do you offer that degree at UJ already, and how many people are taking it?
Absolutely. In fact, we are going for the second year offering this degree, and we have over 100 people who are doing the course. Obviously, you will appreciate that it's not an easy course. So the entrance requirements are slightly higher than the normal, simply because normally people who come to human and social sciences, they're trying to avoid science and technological subjects and vice versa. So this degree requires you to, on the one hand, understand economics, on the other hand, you understand politics, and on the other hand, understand technology and the implications of all this. So it's quite a tricky course, but we have students, more than 100 students, who are enrolled in the course, and I'm looking forward to welcoming a new cohort of students next year.
That's fascinating. Before we go to our next break, I want to ask you about China. You've referred to China as on the way to becoming the first artificial intelligence superpower. Should we be worried about Huawei? You know, in the US and to some degree in the UK, as you know, there have been fears that Huawei's 5G technology as the backbone gives China a great deal of control of sovereignty of countries. Should we as South Africa be worried about that, or should we embrace Huawei?
No, I wouldn't particularly single out Huawei. I would particularly say that for any technological device that we import to the country and we use it for critical things, we should always be worried. I mean, it's a given. We should have capabilities to be able to understand what is going on inside any technological device, whether it comes from China or it comes from Germany or it comes from the United States. As the Japanese put it, business is war. And if business is war, obviously people are going to use their intelligence agencies in order to give them a leg up. Everybody does it. The Americans do it. So we should always be worried. What we should actually be concentrating on is how do we capacitate the South African society so that while we are importing these devices, we are able to identify backdoors whenever they exist, and ultimately we are able to modify these devices so that we protect ourselves, especially if we are deploying it for critical functions.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to ask you about your opinion piece in the Sunday Times. And we're back with Professor Marwala, author of Closing the Gap. Professor, well, I could talk to you for hours, but we're going to run out of time soon enough, and I want to go to your article in the Sunday Times last week, because there you were talking about sort of broader reforms that South Africa needs. And I want to ask you about that. You first of all talked about how the government budget has been getting out of control, and part of the event to take control of it is going to have to involve the spending on civil service salaries.
Absolutely. I'm worried about the South African economy. I'm worried about the fact that we are spending huge amounts of our budget just paying civil servants. I'm worried about the fact that civil servants' skills are not necessarily where they are supposed to be. You just have to go and seek service from government, and you will realize that efficiency is an issue that we need to concentrate on when it comes to the public sector. So these are things that actually worry me. So now, what are the consequences of those things? The consequences of those things is that we are more and more running short of resources to invest in our economy. Investing in our economy is very, very important. The fourth industrial revolution requires us to invest. The recommendations of the fourth industrial revolution commission require government to invest in human capacity development, in infrastructure, in data centers. Maybe not build data centers, maybe we can buy clouds and cloud computing, but nonetheless, it's an investment. So we are not going to have money to invest if the economy does not grow, if we are not efficient. And I do touch on another issue which is very, very important. It comes from J.J. Rousseau, a French thinker from the Enlightenment era. This is the concept of a social contract. Do we have a social contract in South Africa? In the middle of the pandemic, would you say we have a social contract if there is a demand to increase the salaries of public servants? Surely anybody can see that our fiscus is not where it is supposed to be. Surely anybody can see that we need to release resources so that we can invest in our economy. If we don't do all those things, then South Africa is going to fall behind, and our problems are going to become increasingly intractable.
This is such a key point. This show's only been going about 4 weeks, but several of the people, I've had really good thinkers on the show from different walks of life in South Africa, and they all seem to think that NEDLAC, which is supposed to bring together, to create that social contract between business, government, and labor, that NEDLAC isn't necessarily fit for purpose anymore. It doesn't fully represent business, it doesn't fully represent labor, doesn't fully represent the NGOs. Is that your sense too, that NEDLAC, that we need to change our institutions and update them for the 21st century?
No, absolutely. I agree that there's a need for updating. But the social contract is much more broader than NEDLAC. When a citizen goes to the city of Johannesburg because they have a wrong bill, they got a wrong bill, and the problem just does not seem to go away for months, then you are eating on the social contract.
Yes.
Then you are making that citizen distrust government.
Yes.
And if that citizen distrusts government, how do you expect that citizen to work for the benefit of our society? When there is no water in our homes for 10 hours, that also again eats into that social contract. So the social contract, yes, we must sit on one table, we must come, NEDLAC must bring all the stakeholders, and we must discuss the problems of the country. But most importantly, the social and political system must work for all of us to strengthen the social contract.
Now, this also requires, and that was the second point you made in your article, restructuring our civil service and to make it more meritocratic. I've also read about the Chinese and Japanese civil servants and how they modernized and reformed in both countries. And it really had a lot to do with bringing in a different set of skills into the civil service and a different level of meritocratic appointments.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. I mean, if I were to use, maybe I'm being bombastic here, if I were to use a bombastic word, I think South Africa needs its own enlightenment. And this enlightenment is when we start understanding our problems and we start understanding what it will take to get out of our problems and then to go and do something about it so that we can be able to grow this country and make it a very prosperous society.
You've just defined how I define this show, the purpose of this show, although you've defined it better than I did.
Thank you.
Okay, next point. You also talked about restructuring our state-owned enterprises, and you gave an example of Denel. Tell us what you mean by that and how you could find a solution, because we need solutions.
Well, I mean, you know, we absolutely have, you know, state-owned enterprises that no longer can be able to meet their mandate. And it is quite clear that many of them require bailout. But the problem, here lies the problem. The problem is that we cannot really see what lies beyond the bailout. We know about SAA,
yes,
and its problems and the amount of money that it actually requires. But there doesn't seem to be a plan on the table, certainly not the one that I have seen, which basically is looking at how SAA is going to improve its efficiency. You know, because if it doesn't, then it becomes an organization that every now and then you have to pour money into it to make it sustainable. The question is why? No, Denel is a classic example of a company that is sitting on the technology largely from the 80s in an era where artificial intelligence is so important in that sector, and you don't get a
this
sense
is military arms, the arms
that
industry.
it has invested in these technologies. So we need to relook at our state-owned enterprise to see whether we can be able to run these institutions. And if we can't run these institutions, we need to take tough decisions. And sometimes, and for Denel, I think it needs to be to focus on producing goods that can be consumed by our citizens, simply because the technologies of wars, the technologies of war and the markets of wars are not as profitable as we would like to have them, to the extent that will make such institutions viable.
So this raises the question: where? I mean, I think you're acknowledging that we're not solving our problems in South Africa fast enough. We have the resources in the country, but we don't seem to have the right resources in the right places. Where do you think the solutions to South Africa's problems are going to come from? And how far are we in getting to them?
Well, I mean, I will go back to the recommendations of the Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission that have now been accepted by Cabinet.
Yes.
One of the things that we realize is that, for example, let's take the recommendation to capacitate artificial intelligence applications in South Africa. It is clear that you have more know-how in private hands than in public hands. It's clear. You don't even have to go and do a study. You know, there are more people who know about neural networks in the public spaces than in the private in the private spaces than in the public spaces. Now, if that is the case, it naturally tells you that the role of non-state actors in the revitalization of our economy cannot be emphasized enough. You know, the role of non-state actors in the solving of ESCOM cannot be emphasized enough. And the reason for that is because there's simply more know-how in the private spaces than in the public spaces.
That's quite true. But why are we moving so slowly?
Well, I think it's a number of reasons. One of the reasons is because for you to be able to see the agency of the complexity of the economic problems that we face, you have to understand economics. For you to be able to understand that if we don't do anything about the rapid technological developments and the deployment of these into our production, you have to understand about technology. And all these things require all the key role players, whether we as citizens, whether as voters, whether as politicians, whether as members of parliament, to actually be adequately educated to be able to understand these issues. And once we do that, we'll then realize the agency of this, and we will pressurize those whom we have put into government to do the right things. And we will, as citizens and as businessmen and women, do what is supposed to be done to improve the competitiveness of South Africa.
Well, Professor Marwala, we've discussed some pretty serious problems, but I must say I've been very encouraged having the people of your caliber around close to government to help fix them. I think that gives us a real chance of getting there. Thanks so much for talking to us. Good luck with your book, and I hope to talk to you again in the near future.
No, thank you very much, and I absolutely enjoyed it, and I hope to be talking to you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. My next guest is John Matisonn. He's a retired Irish military officer who settled in South Africa. He's managing director of Grail Security Solutions, author of a guide to fighting piracy, which I assume will not be a bestseller. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about what's happening on our waters off the coast of South Africa and how we can better protect it. First, I want to get a sense of the scope of the problem. My understanding from you and from other things I've read is that the problem is massive. We have people fishing in our waters and denuding our stocks of fish. We have other criminal enterprises on our coasts, and we're not really stopping it.
Yes. So,
what is the scope of the problem with, let's start with fish.
okay, looking at the scope of the problem, first and foremost, we are, and a lot of people don't realize this, the second longest coastline in the whole of Africa, Somalia being the longest coastline. We've got 1.5 million square miles of coast to look after. And the result of the lack of an understanding of the law enforcement that's required in order to look after that coastline, we've now got serious denuding of fish stocks, and overfishing has now been going on for many years. But it's not just that, it's the crime as well. It's the fact that we have drugs brought into our country, trafficking is taking place with abandon. We've got a failure of law enforcement at our ports. We have the 3 top 10 ports in the whole of Africa for stowaways coming all the way down from other countries in Africa to get on board the ships and to depart from here. We've got the human trafficking coming into South Africa in order to transit on its way off to America and to Europe as well. So these are people who know that there's such low law enforcement. They have the potential to even bring human trafficking into areas like Cape Town.
Before we go further, when you talk about stowaways and human trafficking, which ports are those happening at?
3 of the top 10 ports in the whole of Africa are in South Africa. One is Cape Town, less than 2 miles from where we're sitting now. And the other one, Richards Bay and Durban. And for people who don't realize that Durban is the busiest port in the Southern Hemisphere, we have a major problem there.
Just before we leave the fish point, What is this going to mean for us? I mean, I've read in the past that our fish stocks are being depleted. I understand the ships doing this are Asian, Chinese, and others. Is that true? Where is it coming from? And at what point does it reach the point that we just don't have the fish?
Yeah, it's an increasing concern, and one of the biggest problems we have had up until recently has been the cozy relationship that has taken place between one of the particular ministries and the fishing companies, our local fishing companies, and then their relationship with some of the foreign companies. A lot of them, most of them, being from Asia, some of them being from Spain and Portugal, so European as well. So we have, and there were statistics were pulled out by a research company here in Cape Town recently, which stated that 6 billion rands worth of fish, 4.4 billion rands worth of fish is taken out of our waters every year. That's just the perlimone and the Patagonian toothfish. If you put on top of that all our hake and our sardines, we're going to 6 billion. What is significant about that figure is that's the same figure as what is taken out of our waters legally. So that is an extraordinary figure when you think that, and shows the lack of law enforcement that we have in our waters.
What impact does that have on local South African fishermen around the Cape, for instance?
One of the big problems we have is the cozy relationship that takes place with some of our major fishing companies, with Asian fishing companies, and with DAF as it was then, has resulted in a lot of licenses going out to foreign companies. The result of that has meant a lot of our local fishermen have been neglected, and it has had an enormous impact on some of our coastal communities. And they lose their jobs.
And what about crime? I once talked to an ambassador in South Africa, foreign ambassador here, who said that the criminal networks and drug trafficking on our coasts is enormous.
Yes, it is. And one of the problems we do have is, again, the lack of assets that we have in the water carrying out any kind of interdiction of ships coming into our water has meant that drugs coming in from West Africa, coming in from South America into West Africa, and then from West Africa down to us, most notably from Nigeria, and then secondly from Asia that come into our waters, have carefree abandoned because they know they can bring in they can bring in as much as they want in the knowledge that there is nobody to interdict them. And so South Africa has, as a result, become a gateway for a lot of Southern Africa.
Now, when the arms deal was being negotiated in South Africa and when it was being justified, a big component was, we have the submarines and the frigates or corvettes, whatever you want to call them, and we were told that they would help with fishing, with stopping fisheries. But my understanding is that that's not what they do.
No, and the problem that the Navy has got is, well, fundamentally they don't have a lot of assets. And the 4 frigates that were purchased, the 3 submarines that were purchased, and then when you look at the very small number of coastal fishing patrol vehicles as well, and you look at 1.5 million square miles of coastline, which when you superimpose that on South Africa is larger than South Africa, you realize that the assets we've got, and there was a parallel done at one stage where it would be the same as 3 police cars patrolling the whole of Western Europe, driving at 35 miles per hour, which would therefore, as we can all see, it's unpoliced.
And what you haven't referred to is that even the frigates and subs that we have, not only are they not all operational, but also, I mean, we know this from the head of the military and the defense minister, that they don't have the funding for maintenance. So it's just a catch-22. They're not functioning properly, and they can't function properly.
Yeah, and when you look at the budget in 1994, 2.5% of the GDP was spent on defense. It has been a steady decline every single year until this year, where it's now 0.95%. We've now got only 65% of what the Navy has asked for the next financial year is going to be given to them. So the cannibalization of assets is really what is taking place. And then to use what is existing at the moment for obscure projects as well, no disrespect to the Navy, but the idea of Project Corona, which is having ships off the coast between Mozambique and Madagascar to look for pirate ships, when piracy hasn't existed really up in that part of the world since 21st of April last year, which was the last pirate incident that took place.
Well, I mean, that raises the question of our Navy. Our Navy isn't doing that job. And from what I've read of your writings about this in the Daily Maverick, what the Navy does is things like training in demining and things like that, which we don't need. We don't have that kind of war threat.
Yeah, and using frigates to, as you quite rightly say, we haven't got the funding to keep a lot of this afloat. What little there is left afloat has also been restricted financially, the amount of hours that the ships can go out to sea. So to use the Navy as it stands today as a fighting function against the crime that's taking place in our water, I think is a misnomer, because we don't have all the different facets that are required for law enforcement are all split up between different organizations. The Navy themselves have got frigates that are, they can be used as offshore patrol vehicles, but they're not. They have a function under Op Corona, the issue of working and combating illegal fishing, to combat the smuggling, etc. They have a specific role which says that they are to deter this crime from happening in our waters, but they are not to interdict. And when you know that there are illegal fishing boats operating in our waters who are inspired by the amount of money that they can make, you need people who can interdict. If you have Patagonian fish, which is now being reduced in its quantities so much that the value of it is now so great, there's the circle. You are now encouraging more illegal fishing in our waters. One quick example, tuna a few years ago was so plentiful we had it in our dog food. Today, one tuna is being sold in Tokyo for R250,000. So if you know it's worth more money, you're coming back to catch more of it.
We're going to run out of time all too quickly, so I want to ask you your solution.
Well, for KISA, the idea of the budget, the looking at the national development plan was the idea of trying to have a more outward-looking nation rather than inward-looking and looking inwards to as a land-based people. The idea of it now looking out towards the ocean and trying to use the resources that we've got better. We need the Navy to take ownership of that component of the NDP, and we need it to take ownership of the law enforcement function that needs to be carried out. They are the template, they are the structure, they've got structures in place. They've got incredibly capable officers, they've got an incredibly capable organization. It just needs to now be focused towards law enforcement.
That effectively means changing our Navy, mostly, if not entirely, into a Coast Guard that has the right kind of vessels, but really knows that its job is to interdict smuggling and all of these other crimes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, is there anyone listening to this idea?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems the Navy have got is the constraint they have, that many people feel that South Africa should be, first and foremost, the country that is going to end up in the United Nations in the permanent, as a permanent member of the Security Council, representing the continent of Africa. I think if we also get rid of that notion, because it's not going to happen. Algeria has a bigger Navy than we do now. If we remove the commitments we have to the African Union, as well to the United Nations, if we focus exclusively on looking after what we have here, we've got people who understand, and the leader, the boss, Admiral Shlongwane, who is the Admiral of the Navy, Rear Admiral of the Navy, he knows very clearly what needs to be done. And in 2017, as far back as that, he knew that there was a need for them to be looking at new roles for the Navy, or their very existence could come to an end.
That's John Matisonn. Thank you very much, and that's our show. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll be back with us next week. I'm John Matisonn.